Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and I'm here with Clay Boykin. Welcome, Clay.
It's good to be here.
Clay, we have so much to talk about. Those of you who don't know Clay, think Joseph Campbell in 2017, because we're talking about the evolution of mankind, womankind, humankind, from where we were, how we're transitioning, and where we're going. Let's start at some of his story, your history.
Okay.
Clay, you grew up in a time in the late 50s and the early 60s in Texas, when a man had a definition. It was pretty clear who we were.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that experience and a little bit about the evolution of who you were then and growing up?
Sure. Yes, I grew up in College Station at a time when there were 10,000 people there.
Yeah.
And the culture was drawn off of A&M.
Yeah.
And, you know, during World War II, A&M put more officers into the field than any other school in the nation, even the military academies.
Wow.
In that time, the warrior was what it was about. And that was the energy and that was the culture of the city. And for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
There was a need to defend.
Yep.
And so with that underlying culture came, it's how we grew up.
And you were in the Corps, and for those of you around the world who don't know, A&M is very well known for the Corps, which is the Corps of Cadets,
Right.
And very much of a it was just when women were first allowed, because this was only a male school, right?
That's right. It was all male. It was all cadets, all in the ROTC, up until the late 60s when it became optional after your first 2 years. But in the fall of '72, the year I started my freshman year, there were actually women living on campus.
Wow, what a change that must be. I mean, going through that culture change
Right.
of actually seeing diversity go into the culture.
You know, there were 16,000 students my freshman year. The year I graduated, there were like 35,000. And there was at least half, if not 60% of the incoming freshman classes were women.
Wow.
So the change was just remarkable. Matter of fact, the first year, there was a dorm, 2 dorms. Well, no, 1 dorm that was co-ed.
Yeah. Wow. That's extraordinary to see the kinds of, and then you went into the Marines.
Yes.
And it was Marine. Now, how did the Marines, because one of the things that I know about you in the little bit that we met and talked is you have a deeply sensitive nature, a deeply sensitive and emotional conscience. It's part of who you are, and which is not what we as men are traditional in the idea of who men are supposed to be. At least when I was growing up, when you were growing up, there's not a part of it. So how was that conflict going on, and going into the Marines? How did those internal lives live together?
It was tough. Like you said, there's an emotional part of me. It comes from my DNA, you know, my Italian background.
Sicilian,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And at the same time, you know, to be a man is not to show emotion.
Yeah.
And to honor my father. World War II, Battle of the Bulge, right in the thick of things. To honor him, I wanted to spend some time in the military service.
Yeah.
Which is counter to where my heart kind of was. But I felt that drive. I felt that energy to do that. And I also wanted to pay for school because, you know, you just pay for school. And yeah, so I went in and they had a Naval ROTC program that was starting. And I thought, well, that's cool. I could wear a Navy uniform.
Yeah.
And I went in there. And, yeah. And I signed up and I walked out the door and this Marine major comes gliding up to me. He was short. He had his dress blue trousers and his red shirt, red stripe down and khaki shirt, and he was decorated up to here, and he looked me up and down. He says, "Oh, you'd make a good Marine." Spun around and glided off. And I said, I like that uniform better. So that's how I chose to go into the Marine Corps, and I took a Marine Corps scholarship.
So you became a Marine officer. What was that experience, and what was the culture of the Marines at that time? This would have been, so you graduated in
76.
In 76, so this is post-Vietnam.
Just
post-Vietnam. And so here is Clay Boykin in the Marines with a Marine lieutenant, right? Second lieutenant?
Right. Yeah. Well, at A&M, going into the Marine Corps, one of the first things we learned, after we got our haircut and got our uniforms on, they marched us over to the Memorial Student Center and said, "You memorize this inscription." And it was John 15:13. "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend." And that's the heartbeat of that school.
Yeah.
That's the heart. I would lay down my life for you because I know you would lay down your life for me.
Exactly.
That's where it begins. And that's the heartbeat. And we grow and we learn that. And that's leadership at its best. And in the Marine Corps, yeah, it's a tough group of guys. But that's tenfold. It's all about heart. And from that, servant leadership.
So what did you learn about yourself during your tour as a Marine officer? What kinds of evolution in Clay Boykin was happening at that time?
The first realization was that the backbone of the Marine Corps is a non-commissioned officer.
Absolutely.
And the first thing I did was I came up to the gunnery sergeant and I said, "Gunny, what can I do to support you? What can I do to clear the way in front so that you can come in and do what you need to do? Because if you're not successful, I'm not successful." So I kind of turned the organization chart upside down.
Okay. Fine. Okay, we're done. That's it. Everybody can leave now. We can wrap, because that you have just encapsulated the entire piece of what I've seen the success in business, and any business that has ever been, any organization, any group, in that beautiful story.
And it was underscored in the Marine Corps. That gunnery sergeant took care of me. He said, "Lieutenant," he pulled me to the side and says, "Don't do that."
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I was smart enough
Yeah.
to recognize that, to support those who know what they're doing.
Because what I've found, what I'm learning, what I've always continued to learn is that arrogance in me always comes from insecurity. It is never comes. So where did that humility grow to be able to say and to be able to listen to a non-commissioned officer who you technically outrank, but to know enough to be able to say, "Help me"?
Was taught to me in a sense. It's interesting, in some of the military services, they talk about my superior officer.
Yeah.
That's not the language in the Marine Corps. My senior officer.
Oh.
You get the difference?
Yes.
I may be senior to you, but you know what you're doing in this area. And far be it from me not to listen and not to support what you're doing.
So what was the diversity like among the officer corps, racially, gender-wise, at the time you were in?
It was all of it was male in my environment. The racial mix was fairly balanced. There were, it was fairly balanced. Now,
it has been more in the military than it has been in many of the.
The reason I'm pausing is because I genuinely don't remember black and white in there. The old saying is, well, "What color is a Marine?" He's green. I really have to pause and think, because I didn't think about that.
Fascinating. So all right. So you decided not to do a career?
Oh, I went in without an intention of doing it. I mean, I had a regular commission.
Sure.
But my
But
intention.
that's how you pay it back, by
That's right. You know, pay for school, do some time to honor my father and his service,
Yes.
and then move on, take and learn, and then move on from there. So I had a little over 4 years in the Corps.
And all right, you separate.
Hmm.
What does the world look like? We're in what, 1980?
Yes.
All right, 80. We're just when the the integrated circuit has happened.
Hmm.
We're way pre-internet, but the integrated circuit, the computer revolution is beginning to just little burbles around. And were you an engineering guy?
Oh gosh, no.
You come across as an engineer. See, that's the thing that, like, you can talk engineering.
I can, yeah, kind of.
You speak the
Let
language.
me first say this, that I got to Austin as fast as I could, and that was in 1980.
Yes.
And, you know, there were, what, 350,000 people here at the time.
Yeah.
And I had the fortunate opportunity to join Motorola. And they wanted me to go into marketing, business development, but, you know, my hair was still short, and, you know, I was still starching my shirts.
High and tight.
High and tight, exactly. And so I said, well, there's a production manager job here, a foreman job. Let me do that and learn the factory, and then I'll move on. And so that was my way in. I could kind of decompress, make the shift, and bring value to the production floor, because they were growing it. They were 20 or 30 people, and we were growing, adding it to make it 100 or so. And
Wow.
these were mostly it was a weekend shift. These were mostly college students
Yeah.
and Vietnamese, both people. And we did some pretty remarkable things.
What were you doing there? What was on the production floor? What
It was
were
a
you
final
creating?
test area, so
Yeah.
we were testing the computer chips. We were testing them on the wafer. They
Yeah.
called it probe, and then they'd be shipped off to be assembled. And then when they come back, we test them again. So we test them for, you know, do they fail, or what speed are they? And so we grew the shift that year that I was in production.
What did you learn about leadership and leadership in the corporate that was different from the military as you're beginning to make this transition? Because I know from what we've talked about that you had some remarkable success and experiences there, but this was the germination of them. So could you talk about your evolution in leadership and your understanding of what it was like there?
You know, the only thing different from the Marine Corps was we weren't wearing Marine Corps uniforms. We were wearing smocks.
Right.
You know, but the principles of leadership, servant leadership,
Which
on
wasn't
the
a word at the time,
No.
right? Had not,
well,
or had just been.
in '71, Robert Greenleaf had coined that term,
Right.
servant leadership. It wasn't in my vocabulary necessarily, but
Or Motorola's.
no, it wasn't. But it was the same thing. I took the lead production operator. You know, I took the supervisor on the floor, and I pulled him in and says, "Look, I don't know how to do this stuff. What can I do to support you?" Because if they weren't successful, I wasn't going to be successful. So it was common sense.
Oh yeah, that's a word that kind of dings me a little bit because like we were talking about earlier, carrying suitcases across airports
No wheels.
and without wheels does not seem like, it seemed like common sense, but yet how many of these things, but still common sense can be such. It is an effective way of doing it. And so did you get recognized? Did Motorola recognize?
Well, yes, they did, because Motorola in the '80s was doing some pretty great things.
I know.
In the area of, you know, technology, but also Bob Galvin Jr. was bringing in principles of like constant respect for people and uncompromising integrity, and they were bringing you know, cycle time reductions and so forth. And I asked myself the question. I said, well, if this is what Motorola is saying, how does that match up with what I did in the Marine Corps and what I learned at A&M? And what did Peter Drucker say? And, you know, and Tom Peters, what does Tom Peters say? You know, if you just read his book, you're going to get fired.
So were you reading it a lot at that time? Were you absorbing on your off time? Were you growing?
Yes.
How was Clay Boykin
That was
growing?
my personal study. It was, you know, I have a sense of the servant leadership model.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I read it, but it was just common sense. But then I said, well, now how am I going to take all of this and synthesize it, put it in context for me? And you know, after doing all that, I ran across a book that was called the Leadership Challenge.
Uh-huh.
You know, create an inspired vision, model the way, enable others to act. Those sorts of encourage the heart.
Isn't it
Challenge the thought.
amazing that what I love about today, and when you go down, you can go into any airport or go into any library and look at leadership, and it's another iteration of a basic truth.
Yeah. You know, I had the privilege. I'm going to fast forward just for a minute.
Please.
Because we're talking about Robert Greenleaf. In my men's circle, I learned one night that the brother of the biographer, the official biographer for Robert Greenleaf, that his brother was in my circle. And when I learned that, I grabbed the fellow by the lapels afterwards. Says, I got to meet this fellow. And we had a wonderful afternoon together. His name was Don Frick. And we talked on levels that were just magical, and it affirmed so much of what I had been doing and the style, I guess, or the culture that I was bringing into organizations. It just affirmed it. And
did Motorola recognize this and begin to promote, begin to say, here, we need you. I don't know what you're doing here, but we want that in other places. Is that how it happened? How did it work because we have that format now. Google has mindfulness and their program is search with, I've forgotten what it is. Anyway, you can look it up. Anyhow, Google has this. So many people have search within ourselves, search first where we're going. All of this, how did they recognize it in you at that time in the 80s when we see anyone who studies history would know that this was an important and transformative time?
I had I was fortunate in that I was able to go from organization to organization, and what happened was we call it a change agent.
Yeah.
You know, they would parachute me in and they'd call me the marketing director.
Yeah.
Or they'd parachute me in and call me the operations director. And somebody said,
doesn't matter what my title is.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Put it on PowerPoint what you're going to do. And I said, I can't. I can't.
Right.
But I could go in and, you know, today I would say I brought spirit to the organization. That wasn't my vocabulary back then, but
Nor theirs.
Right. But I brought leadership in a different form. And it was the essence of caring about you. Where are you going in your career? I really want to know, and I want to help you get there, because down the road, it's likely that I'll be working for you. So I took the long view to do that. I did, oh gosh, one organization was just ailing, and I went in and started kind of get a sense of what was happening, and there was fear. And so what's the lowest common denominator that we can relate to each other? What's the language that we can speak with one another that's not charged? And we said, well, it's wellness. You know, I brought the wellness director, the employee assistance director, the HR, the training, and brought them in with my staff. And I said, okay, you know, we're going to do something different. And we did. And without saying we're changing the culture, we changed the culture. And I'll tell you, that was about a $250 million organization.
Right. When $250 million was money at that time.
Yeah. 3 years later, it was about $750 million. The only thing that changed was the culture. And I was fortunate to have a general manager that was brilliant. He said, I got your back, Clay, go do what you want to do. And I did. And we did some really unique things. You know, we had a division picnic, and I said, I'm going to take candid shots of everybody. And so I did, families and kids playing and so forth. And then I matted and framed 7,500 photographs. Beautifully done, a lot of money. Came in over the weekend, took all the pictures down, all the engineering shots, put these up. And on Monday morning, the engineers came in, they said, Hey, where's my, oh, there's my kid. Hey, look here, here's my kid. Oh, what about that? And everybody was buzzing, you know. And then they turned to me and says, Clay, why'd you do this? And I said, I always want you to remember why you come to work in the morning. And that was the pause of change. I'll tell you this, I caught this one photograph of this little girl. She'd been crying, had this little blue sun hat on, you know, and had the, you know, facing the screen, little alligator tear, a little Mona Lisa smile. And boom, got it. It was one of my favorite shots on the wall. Well, the next year we had the next picnic. And I had hired a face painter. Well, I come up and there's this, you know, one little girl that's there and she's saying, where's the red? And she's painting the face painter's face. Where's the blue? Where's the yellow? And what I realized was the little girl with the alligator tear had gone blind. So here we were. We as an organization were experiencing life together.
Wow.
You know, allowing that to come out, allowing that feeling to connect on a deeper level. You know, seek something greater.
Yeah.
This isn't just about putting out chips and all that. No, the chips that we're putting out, they go into airbags, they go into, you know, anti-brake systems.
Yep.
We're not putting out chips, we're saving lives. Think about that when you're on the production line. Higher level thinking.
So, who were you evolving during this time? Talk about the evolution of you. You would go home, and you go. Was there a calling in your writing? Were you continuing your poetry, continuing the writing? What was going on in the evolution of the consciousness of Clay Boykin?
I have to say I was very conflicted because I knew in my heart what was right. But face it, you know, any engineering company, you know, it's the majority are engineers.
Sure.
And you asked earlier if I was an engineer. No, I'm not. You know, I can connect.
You can talk.
And
you
I
can
can
talk the language.
But
yeah.
any engineer can just talk over my head
Sure.
any moment. And so I had some internal conflict, and my self-confidence was always challenged.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I wanted to, you know, stay to it. Well, that caused, in some ways, I wasn't where my heart was and where my business mind were not aligned.
Exactly.
And that caused me some severe health problems.
Sure, because it will. How else can it manifest?
It's going to come out one way or the other. It's going to be healthy or unhealthy. And for me, you know, I left Motorola. I was with some startup companies, and you know, I had an office on Park Avenue in the shadow of the Empire State Building. Yep. I was commuting, and I was seeing the world. I was doing all the things. I took some time with family, and we were in Jamaica, and I was exercising my creativity in the woods with some primitive art with my little army knife, you know, Swiss
Mm-hmm.
Army knife. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with my heart. I'm feeling something. I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And I really can't put words to it now, but it was a mystical experience.
Mm-hmm.
I went into this place of peace that I've never experienced before. You know, on one side it was like, well, there's a lot I don't have to worry about anymore. But it was more than that. And I leaned against the veil. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just overplaying this. But 24 hours after I got home, they put me in the hospital. I began to have a heart attack. And I had emergency quintuple bypass. Now, I was 53 years old. Now, tell me, I was coming from my heart, and I was bringing heart into the organization. It was all about heart. Leadership is about heart. But there was more that had to come out. It was going to come out one way or the other. Stress, anxiety, depression.
Yes, of course.
You know,
addiction. It works
just take
all,
that cycle.
and it's full spectrum.
That's right. And there you go. Well, I convalesced for 3 months, went back to the office in New York, and I thought, you know, I've never been to the top of the Empire State Building. So I went up, and I was still a little crickety in the chest, right? And I went up, and I looked down, I could see my office down there, little office window. And I said, metaphorically, I've made it to the top. I'm at the top of the Empire State Building. It's almost killed me. Now, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Well, that was at the end of '07. I went home, markets crashing, I got laid off. First time since I was 16 that I wasn't working. Wasn't earning a paycheck. That's what we men do. And I panicked. And I worked for 2 years to try and get a job. 2 years, nothing.
Really?
Nothing.
What did you learn about yourself during that experience?
Well, it was the dark night of the soul. And I fought it. I went desperately to try and find work. Desperately. Wrong way to do it. I felt like I had to control it, and I had no control. I was hospitalized, you know, with depression and just, you know, and when I came out, a fellow from Office Max called me because I was putting resumes everywhere. He said, "Come talk to me." He said, "You got a resume this long. What are you doing?"
I know.
You
Look at what you've done. I mean,
I said,
yes.
"I need to reconnect with people. I need to get back in touch." So he said, "Okay, well, you're not going to be here long, are you?" And I said, "No, but I'm going to be your best employee." You know, so I, you know, did check out. I stocked the aisles. I loved it because I was back in action, and I was learning something. You know, and 6 weeks later, an old Marine Corps buddy of mine hired me. That was a very important time.
Yes.
Yeah.
The stocking shelves. I understand what you're talking
You
about.
know, I went from the top of the Empire State Building
Yep.
to part-time at $9 an hour. You know, I began going to the Unity Church here in town. You know, everybody's welcome, no judgment.
Yep.
Just creating a safe space. And Reverend Steve would talk on Sundays, and I'd mind map, you know, and draw and take notes and cry. You know, everybody cries in there at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was trying to figure this out, and where am I, you know. And one day he said, "You know, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't have to build a condo there." You know, I went, oh, I can choose. I have choice. And things began to change.
God, just to know, one of the things, and there's a book called A Course in Miracles.
Oh,
You may
yes.
have heard of it, and other people. But one of the lines that I love about it in that particular book is that the definition of a miracle is a change in perception. So the request to the universe